I still remember the day my son-in-law pointed at me across the dinner table and said, "The mother-in-law nobody can stand." Those words cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just a joke, it was a clear message. No one was laughing, but nobody said anything either. My son, David, just sat there, staring at his plate. The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I realized how much I had been overlooked in my own family. It was John's birthday dinner, but somehow, I was the one who felt forgotten. The family had gathered around, but I wasn't part of the warmth that usually filled the room. I was the outsider. I had been the one to set the table, cook the meal, and make sure everything was perfect. Yet, at that very table, I found myself being ridiculed in front of everyone. It wasn't the first time, and I knew deep down that it wouldn't be the last. Over the years, I had noticed the subtle changes, the dismissive glances, the whispers when I left the room, the way they avoided talking to me about anything important. I wasn't even sure when it started, but I knew exactly when I began to feel invisible. I tried to shake off the sting of John's words. I smiled as I always did, but inside, something had snapped. I excused myself from the table, making my way to the kitchen. The house felt different now. The silence was louder than ever before. I stood there, looking out the window, feeling like a stranger in my own home. As I glanced back at the dinner table, I saw John and Sophie, his wife, laughing together, their faces lit up with smiles, while David sat quietly, avoiding my gaze. This wasn't how family was supposed to feel. I had raised David with love, given him everything, and yet here I was, an afterthought in the lives of those I cherished most. Sophie had always been distant, but tonight, she was bolder. Her words cut sharper, her actions more deliberate. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game, a person to be tolerated, not loved. And now, it seemed like they were ready to push me aside entirely. I knew I couldn't let it continue, but what could I do? It was clear that no one was going to stand up for me, not even David. He had become a shadow of the boy I once knew. He barely spoke to me anymore, and when he did, it was always in the presence of Sophie. I sighed, leaning against the counter. How had I gotten here? How had my relationship with my son deteriorated so completely? The thought was overwhelming. And yet, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I had spent so many years being the dutiful mother, the one who kept the family together, the one who made sure everything was perfect. But now, it felt like they had forgotten me. They no longer needed me, or maybe they never had. I turned away from the window and walked back to the dinner table. I didn't say a word as I sat down, my hands trembling slightly. I had been silent for so long, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Something inside me was stirring, something I hadn't felt in years. It was time to stand up for myself. And when I finally did, they would see that I wasn't just the mother-in-law nobody could stand. I was more than that. The evening dragged on, but my mind raced with thoughts I could no longer suppress. I watched the others, their laughter, their ease, as if I was invisible to them, as though I had never been part of their lives at all. Sophie and John were inseparable, their bond so apparent that even David seemed to fade into the background. I had spent the better part of my life raising him, guiding him, and now, it felt as though I was a stranger to him. The hurt that had started as a small ache in my chest had now become a sharp pain, gnawing at me. How could he not see what was happening? How could he not see how Sophie was changing him, molding him into someone who didn't even care enough to stand by his own mother? I excused myself from the table, walking slowly down the hallway to the kitchen. It was the only place I could be alone with my thoughts, the only place where I could think clearly. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space. The kitchen, once the heart of the house, now felt like an echo of what it used to be. It was a place I had filled with warmth, laughter, and the smells of home-cooked meals. But now, it felt empty, like the rest of my life. I sighed, running a hand through my graying hair. The pain I felt was no longer just about the insult at the dinner table. It wasn't just about being ridiculed by John. It was about the years of subtle slights, the way Sophie had wormed her way into my family and turned everyone against me. She had always been dismissive, always condescending, but tonight was different. Tonight, her words had been deliberate, meant to remind me that I was no longer wanted, no longer needed. I thought about the times I had tried to reach out to David, only to be met with cold indifference. I thought about the times I had begged him to visit, to spend time with me, but he always had an excuse. And when he did come around, it was always with Sophie by his side, as though I was the third wheel in my own family. The realization hit me like a slap. Sophie had been planning this for years. It wasn't just the dinner or the joke at the table. It was everything. She had worked her way into David's life, into this family, and she had done it with one goal in mind: to take everything. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I swallowed it down. Anger wouldn't help me now. I had to think. I had to be smart. I wasn't going to let Sophie win. I wasn't going to let her tear apart everything I had built, everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let her take my family. I knew I had to act, but I had to do it carefully. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. No, I would fight back in my own way. I would make sure that I was not the one who was forgotten, not the one who was cast aside. The years of being ignored, of being treated like I didn't matter, had come to an end. I was done playing the victim. I was done waiting for them to realize what they had. The first step was simple. I would get my life back. I would take back the power that had been stolen from me. I wasn't going to let Sophie, or anyone else, dictate how my story would end. I would take control, and I would make sure that when the dust settled, it was I who had the last word. The days that followed the dinner felt like a blur. I spent most of my time alone, in the quiet solitude of my home. My once bustling house now seemed eerily silent. I had always prided myself on creating a warm, welcoming environment for my family, but now it felt more like a museum, filled with memories of better days. As I moved through my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I knew it wasn't just the eyes of John and Sophie I had to worry about anymore. It was David's eyes that haunted me now. He hadn't spoken to me much since that night, and when he did, his words felt hollow, like they were coming from someone who didn't really know me anymore. I could see it in his eyes, the way they avoided mine. The way he'd rather talk to Sophie about everything, from family matters to the smallest details. It was as though I didn't even exist to him. It hurt, but I didn't let it show. I kept myself busy. I didn't want to dwell on the pain. Instead, I focused on the small things, the things that mattered to me, the things that gave me peace. I spent time in the garden, tending to the flowers that had been a part of my life for years. I used to do it with Noel, my late husband, but now it was just me. The garden had always been our sanctuary, a place where we could escape from the chaos of life. I remember when we first planted the roses, the day we moved into this house. We had spent hours picking out the perfect flowers, and we laughed as we imagined how they would grow and bloom over the years. Now, as I stood there alone, I couldn't help but wonder if those roses would be the last thing I would ever tend to in this house. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving it behind. But the reality was clear. If I didn't do something soon, I might be forced out. Sophie had made it clear that this house was no longer mine. She had whispered it through her words, her actions, and her subtle manipulations. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I couldn't let her take everything from me. I wasn't going to let her erase me from my family's life, just like that. I had raised David. I had given everything for him, and now I was going to make sure he remembered that. He couldn't forget everything we had shared. It wasn't just the years we spent together, the memories we built, or the sacrifices I made. It was the love I had given him, the love that had never wavered, even when things got hard. I was still his mother, no matter how much Sophie tried to convince him otherwise. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I had always been the one to keep the family together, to make sure everything ran smoothly. But now, it was time for me to take control. I wasn't going to sit back and watch as they took everything from me. I didn't care what it took. I was going to fight for my place in this family. I was going to make them see that I was not the woman they could push aside. I had my pride, my dignity, and my memories, and I would hold on to them with everything I had left. It wasn't just about the house or the inheritance. It was about respect. I had given so much of myself over the years, and it was time for me to take something back. I wasn't going to let them dictate my future. No matter what they thought of me, no matter how much they tried to push me away, I would stand my ground. And I would make sure they understood one thing. I was not someone they could walk over. I was still Elaine Parker, and I wasn't going anywhere. The days passed slowly, each one dragging by with the same suffocating weight. I kept myself busy, pretending that everything was normal, but inside, I was unraveling. The house, once filled with the laughter of children and the comfort of family, now felt cold and unwelcoming. Every corner of it reminded me of what I had lost. I walked through, the rooms, touching the furniture, running my fingers over the photographs on the walls. These were the moments I had built, the moments I had cherished, but now they felt like nothing more than fleeting memories, memories that were slipping away from me. I stood in front of the old family portrait that hung above the fireplace, the one of David as a child, laughing in my arms. I couldn't help but wonder where that boy had gone. He had changed so much, and it wasn't just because of Sophie. I could feel it now, the slow shift in him, the distance that had grown between us. But it was Sophie who had made it worse. She had wormed her way into his life, pulling him further and further away from me. It was no longer just about the house or the little things she said. It was about her control over David, over everything. I had spent my life giving to them, to my family, but now I was the one being discarded. I had tried to talk to David, tried to remind him of what we had, but every conversation felt like a battle I couldn't win. He listened, but there was always that look in his eyes, indifference, like he had already made up his mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just wait for him to come around. I needed to take action to reclaim what was mine. The thought was terrifying, but I knew it was the only way. I couldn't keep playing the role of the helpless mother, the one they could walk all over. I had been strong for so long, and now it was time to be strong for myself. I needed to find a way to make them see that I wasn't just an afterthought in their lives. I wasn't going to let Sophie win, and I wasn't going to let David slip further away from me. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I made a decision. It was time to stop being passive. It was time to take back control. I had spent enough years silently enduring, quietly suffering, but that was over. I wasn't going to allow myself to be erased from their lives, to be pushed aside as if I had never mattered. The next day, I started making calls. I contacted an attorney, someone who could help me understand my options, someone who could help me protect what was mine. I wasn't going to be left with nothing. I wasn't going to let them take everything, not without a fight. I knew that this wouldn't be easy. I knew that it would take time, that there would be obstacles along the way. But I was prepared. I wasn't going to back down, not anymore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the house or the money. This was about my dignity, my self-respect. I had raised David to be a good man, to be someone who valued family. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that. He had let Sophie manipulate him, let her convince him that I was a burden. It hurt, but it also fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings and phone calls, of paperwork and legal jargon. I didn't understand all of it, but I didn't need to. All I needed to know was that I had options, that I had a way forward. I wasn't just a helpless woman sitting in the background anymore. I was taking control of my own destiny. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I had been taken for granted. The house, the property, the money, they weren't just things to me. They were the physical manifestations of everything I had worked for, everything I had built over the years. I had given so much to my family, and now it was time for them to understand that I wasn't going to just walk away without a fight. I wasn't going to let Sophie and David strip me of everything I held dear. One morning, I received a letter from the lawyer. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the document that would set everything in motion. I read it over carefully, my hands shaking slightly. This was it. The beginning of the end, or the beginning of something new. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the forgotten mother. I was done being the woman no one cared about. I was taking back my life, and no one was going to stop me. The weeks that followed were a blur of uncertainty and quiet determination. I had set everything in motion, taking the first steps toward regaining control of my life, but the process was slow. Each morning, I woke up early, stared at the house that had once been filled with so much love, and reminded myself that I was doing the right thing. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to let them push me out without a fight. But the hardest part was still ahead. I had made my intentions clear, but I hadn't yet confronted David, the one person whose opinion still mattered to me. He had always been my son, and despite everything that had happened, despite the distance that had grown between us, I still loved him. That love had never wavered, even when he couldn't see me. I wasn't sure how to approach him. I didn't know if he would even listen, but I knew I had to try. One afternoon, I received a call from David. His voice was flat, distant, but there was something in the tone that made my heart skip. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I knew this moment was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. I had spent so much time trying to protect myself from the hurt that I had forgotten how to face it head on. I agreed to meet him at the cafe down the street. It wasn't much, but it was a neutral space, a place where I wouldn't have to look at the walls of my home and feel the weight of my decision. When I arrived, David was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He looked different, older somehow. The last time I had seen him like this, he was still my little boy, the one who would run to me for comfort, the one who would laugh at my silly jokes. But now, he was a man, distant and guarded, a stranger in my eyes. I sat down across from him, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, like a barrier that neither of us knew how to break. Finally, David cleared his throat. "I know things have been tense between us, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want things to be like this." I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of the boy I had raised. "David," I said softly, "I don't know when things changed, but I'm not the one who's different. You are." The words were out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted them. But it was too late to take them back. David looked down at his coffee, his fingers curling around the cup like he was trying to hold on to something. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. Sophie and I, we've been through so much. She's been there for me in ways that you haven't." The words stung, but I held my ground. "I've always been there for you," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "I gave you everything I had, David. I loved you, and I still do. But you've let her come between us. You've let her change you." There was a long pause as David looked up at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I could see it now, the guilt, the doubt, hidden beneath the surface. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my son again, the one who used to confide in me, the one who trusted me. "I don't know what to do," David admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophie, she's been so controlling, but I don't want to lose her. I don't want to lose you, either, Mom. But I don't know how to fix this." The admission hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. "You don't have to choose, David," I said quietly. "But you do need to understand that I'm not going to stand by and watch her take everything. I've spent my life giving to this family, and I'm not going to let her erase me from it." David's eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew. But then, just as quickly, the moment passed. He looked down at his coffee again, lost in thought. "I don't know what's going to happen," he said. "But I need time. I need to figure this out." I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Take all the time you need," I said. "But know this, David. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still your mother, and I always will be." We sat in silence for a few moments longer, neither of us knowing what to say next. Eventually, David stood up, giving me a brief, uncertain smile. "I'll call you soon," he said, before walking out of the cafe. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring out the window at the passing cars. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But for now, I had to be patient. I had to keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the road ahead seemed. The days following my conversation with David were filled with uncertainty. I tried to stay busy, but the weight of the situation was always on my mind. Sophie's presence in my family was growing stronger with each passing day, and every time I saw her, I felt the distance between David and me getting wider. I had tried to be patient, I had tried to wait for him to come around, but as the days went on, I realized that waiting wasn't going to change anything. Sophie had a grip on him that I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just her control over him. It was her ability to manipulate the situation, to make me the villain in a story I never signed up for. I had raised David to be strong, to think for himself, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing me for who I was. He had stopped seeing the woman who had given up so much for him. It wasn't just about the house, or the money, or the things that Sophie was trying to take from me. It was about the years of love, of sacrifices I had made to give him the life he had. But he couldn't see that. He couldn't see how much I had given him, how much I still loved him despite everything. I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't wait for him to come to me anymore. I couldn't sit back and let Sophie control everything. I had to take matters into my own hands. I had spent so many years being the strong one, the one who held the family together, but now I was the one being pushed out. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my place in this family. I had a right to be here. I had a right to be seen. I called a meeting with the lawyer. I needed to know what my options were. I couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. The lawyer explained everything clearly, walking me through the legal process and the steps I needed to take. The house, the property, everything I had worked for, it was all at risk. But I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. I wasn't going to let Sophie and David take everything from me. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and decisions. It was exhausting, but I felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just defending my property. I was defending my place in this family. I was defending my dignity. The hardest part was still facing David. I knew that talking to him again would be a challenge. I had to do it, but I didn't know what would happen after that. Would he finally see the truth? Would he stand by me, or would he choose Sophie? I couldn't predict the outcome, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done waiting. I was done being passive. It was time to take control. I reached out to David again. This time, I asked him to meet me at the house. I wanted to talk to him face to face, in the place where so many of our memories had been made. He agreed. The day of our meeting, I stood in the living room, looking at the familiar walls, the furniture that had been part of my life for so long. It felt strange to be here, knowing that everything was about to change. When David arrived, I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He had always been so confident, so sure of himself, but now he seemed uncertain, like he wasn't sure where to stand. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice almost apologetic. "I've been thinking about everything you said." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I don't know what to say," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know where this leaves us." I took a deep breath. "It leaves us with the truth, David," I said. "I've spent my life giving to you, loving you, but I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. You've let Sophie take control of everything, and you've let her push me out. I can't just sit back and let her erase me." David looked at me, his face softening. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," he said. "I didn't realize what was happening. I've been so caught up in everything. I didn't see how much I've been hurting you." I could feel the weight of his words. For the first time in a long time, I saw the man I had raised, the son I had always known. "I don't want to lose you, Mom," he said, "but I don't know what to do." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. "You don't have to choose, David," I said, "but you do need to understand that I'm not going to let you lose me. I'm still your mother, and I always will be. And no matter what happens, I will always be here for you." The room was quiet for a long time. We didn't need to say anything else. I could feel the weight of everything shifting, the tension easing just a little. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own family. Days turned into weeks, and things didn't get easier. Despite our conversation, I could still feel the tension between David and me. Sophie's presence loomed over everything. I knew she was still trying to manipulate things, pulling strings from behind the scenes, making sure David stayed in her corner. But now, at least, David was no longer completely blind to the situation. He had seen a glimpse of what had been happening. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. I knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had some hope again. I spent my days trying to rebuild my sense of self. I went back to doing the things I loved, things that had made me happy before all of this chaos. I spent more time in the garden, which had always been my refuge. It was a small act, but it helped. It was a way of taking control of something, anything. It reminded me that there was still beauty in the world, even if it wasn't in the places I had hoped. One afternoon, while tending to the roses, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around to see David standing in the doorway, looking uncertain. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I wiped my hands on the towel hanging from my waist and nodded. "Of course," I replied, gesturing for him to come outside. He hesitated for a moment before stepping onto the patio and sitting down next to me. The air was still. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the breeze. We sat in silence for a moment before David spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," he started, "and about everything that's been going on. I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I've just been confused." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. There was regret in his eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw my son again, the boy I raised. "David, I know things have been difficult," I said softly. But you have to understand that I'm not the enemy here. I'm not the one who's been trying to tear this family apart. I've always been here for you, and I always will be." He nodded, his gaze falling to the ground. "I know, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I've let Sophie get in my head, and I've been too afraid to stand up for you. I don't know how I let it get this far, but I promise I'll do better." I reached over and placed a hand on his. It was small, but it was a gesture that meant everything. "David, you don't have to fix everything at once. I just need you to be honest with me. I need you to be there for me, like I've always been there for you." He looked up at me, and this time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. "I'll do that, Mom. I'll make things right." We sat there for a long time, in silence, just enjoying the peace that had returned to our relationship, even if just for a moment. Things weren't perfect, and I knew there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was a step in the right direction. And that was all I could ask for. The next few weeks were a mixture of progress and setbacks. David began to spend more time with me, but Sophie's influence was still strong. I could see the cracks in their relationship, the way she tried to control every decision, every interaction. But David was finally starting to see it, too. He wasn't blind to her manipulations anymore, and that was a start. Sophie didn't take kindly to the changes. There were moments when I could feel the tension between us, the way she would shoot me daggers with her eyes whenever she thought David wasn't looking. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had come to realize that this wasn't just about the house or the property. It was about something deeper: respect, love, and family. And I was no longer willing to let her take that from me. One afternoon, I sat down with David and Sophie. I knew it was time to have a frank conversation. The time for passive-aggressive behavior was over. "Sophie," I began, "I know things have been difficult between us, but I need you to understand something. This family is not just yours. It's mine, too." Sophie didn't say anything, but I could see the way her jaw clenched, the way her eyes narrowed. "I'm not going anywhere," I continued, my voice firm. "And if you truly love David, you will respect that. This is his family, and I'm still a part of it. I always will be." David sat in silence, but I could see him looking at Sophie, waiting for her reaction. Sophie finally spoke, her voice cold. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," she said, but I could hear the underlying bitterness in her tone. "I just don't want things to be so complicated." I looked at her and smiled, not out of malice, but because I knew something she didn't. "Things don't have to be complicated," I said, "but they will be if you keep pushing me away. I'm not going anywhere, Sophie, so you'd better get used to it." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Sophie didn't respond, but the tension between us was palpable. I knew I had made my point, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own life again. Weeks passed, and the tension between Sophie and me remained. But I could feel a shift. David was no longer the same man I had seen for years. He was changing, and it wasn't just because of me. Sophie's hold on him was weakening, and it was starting to show. There were still moments when I saw the old David, the one who would laugh with me, the one who would share small, intimate details of his day. Those moments were fleeting, but they gave me hope. Sophie, on the other hand, was a different story. I knew she hadn't taken kindly to our last conversation. She avoided me when we were in the same room, her coldness unmistakable. But she no longer had the same power she once had. It was clear now that David was seeing her for who she really was: manipulative, controlling, and determined to keep him on her side. But it wasn't just Sophie's behavior that had changed, it was mine too. I had finally stopped waiting for things to improve. I had taken control of my life, my decisions, and my future. I wasn't going to sit in the background any longer. I was taking my place in this family, even if it meant fighting for it. I could feel the weight of the years I had spent being passive, but now I had a fire inside me that couldn't be extinguished. I wasn't just a mother-in-law anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. One evening, I received a message from David. He wanted to meet again. I wasn't sure what to expect this time, but I agreed. We met at the same cafe where we had talked before. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with his coffee cup, but there was a different energy in him now. He seemed more aware, more present, than I had seen in a long time. "Mom," he started, his voice softer than usual. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About everything. About Sophie, about you, about me. And I realized something." I waited, watching him carefully. He was choosing his words carefully, his eyes flicking between mine. I've been blind, he continued. I've let Sophie control too much, and I've ignored you, the one person who's always been there for me. I've been caught up in the wrong things, and I've hurt you in the process. I'm sorry. My heart ached at his words, but I held it together. This was what I had been waiting for, this moment of clarity in him. I didn't want to make him feel worse, but I had to speak my truth too. David, I said quietly, I've always been here for you. I've always loved you, but I can't keep being overlooked. I can't keep being pushed aside like I don't matter. You are my son, and I'm not going to stand by and let anyone treat me like I'm invisible. He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I know. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have seen it sooner. You've always been there for me, and I've let you down. The conversation was emotional, but I could feel a weight lifting. It wasn't the end of our struggles, but it was a new beginning. I wasn't sure what the future held for David and Sophie, but I knew one thing. I was done being passive. I was done being the silent sufferer. I wasn't going to lose my son, but I wasn't going to let Sophie have her way either. The next few weeks were a turning point. David started standing up to Sophie in ways I hadn't seen before. He began to question her decisions, to see through her manipulations. It wasn't easy, and there were arguments, but it felt like the beginning of a shift. Sophie didn't take kindly to David's newfound strength. She started making passive-aggressive comments, trying to undermine him in front of me, but it no longer had the same effect. David didn't flinch. He didn't give in to her as he once had. I knew it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something again. One evening, after a particularly tense family gathering, David pulled me aside. I want you to know that I'm not letting go of you, he said. I don't know what's going to happen with Sophie, but I'm not going to let her come between us anymore. You're my mother, and nothing, not even her, can change that. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had waited for this moment for so long, and now, it felt like everything was starting to come together. Sophie might not be finished with her games, but I knew now that I wasn't fighting alone. I had David back, and no matter what happened, I wasn't going to let go of the family I had built. It had taken years for me to find my voice again, but now that I had, I wasn't going to lose it. We were far from finished, but this was a beginning, and that was enough. Things were starting to settle, but I could feel the undercurrent of tension still running through the family. David was trying, really trying, to rebuild the relationship we once had, but Sophie wasn't making it easy. Her icy demeanor had only grown colder, and she continued to subtly make her presence felt. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had fought too long to reclaim my place in this family, to let her tear it apart again. Slowly, David and I started to have more honest conversations, ones that didn't involve Sophie manipulating the situation. He started to open up about his frustrations, his doubts, and his growing concerns about their relationship. It was a start. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the days passed, I could see the change in him. He was no longer blindly following Sophie's every move. He was questioning things, thinking for himself. And that made all the difference. One evening, David came to visit me. It had been a while since we had spent any time together without the usual awkwardness hanging between us. This time, there was none of that. We sat together in the living room, the familiar smell of my home surrounding us. I had made dinner. Nothing special, just a simple roast with potatoes and carrots, but it felt good to share a meal with him again. As we ate, David spoke up. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything, he began. And I know I've said this before, but I want you to know that I'm trying to make things right. I don't want to lose you. I never should have let it get this bad. I looked at him, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. David, you're my son, I said, my voice steady. I don't want to lose you either. But I need you to understand something. I'm not going to let Sophie control you or this family any longer. You have to stand up for yourself. He nodded, his expression filled with determination. I know. I'm finally seeing it. I've been letting her control everything, but I'm not going to let that happen anymore. I don't want you to feel like you're invisible in your own family. His words hit me like a wave. I had waited so long to hear them, and now that I had, I didn't know what to say. I just smiled, a tear slipping down my cheek. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for seeing me. I've been waiting for this. We didn't need to say anything else. The moment felt complete, like a weight had been lifted off both of us. The silence between us was comfortable, not the heavy kind of silence that had once existed, but a quiet understanding. As the evening wore on, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real hope. Not the kind of hope that comes from waiting for things to change, but the kind of hope that comes from taking control of your life, from making a choice to move forward. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I wasn't going to let it be dictated by anyone but myself. The next day, David came over again, this time without Sophie. He spent the afternoon with me, talking about the future, about what he wanted for himself and for our family. It felt like we were starting over, like we were rebuilding something that had been broken for so long. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it could work. Things with Sophie weren't easy, of course. She still tried to manipulate the situation, still made snide remarks when she thought no one was listening, but I had stopped caring. I had stopped letting her affect me. I had found my strength, and I wasn't going to let her take it from me. As time went on, David and I grew closer. He started making decisions on his own, and I could see the change in him. He wasn't the man I had known before, the one who had let others control his life, but he was becoming someone I could respect again. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was progress. Sophie's hold on him was slipping, and she knew it. I could see the way she looked at me, the way she tried to undermine me whenever she could. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't afraid of losing my family. I had already lost so much, but I had found something even more important, my own strength, my own voice. I was no longer the silent mother-in-law. I was Elaine Parker, and I wasn't going anywhere.